Matthias, if we use tasking, metaphors, and very indirect suggestions, how can we be sure it's working? For example, we cannot future pace with tasking, can we? Well, you do not know for certain at any time whether what you're saying and doing is working in terms of the actual final outcome of the therapy. All you know is the feedback you're getting from the client as and when you intervene with the client, whether that's being accepted or not. You do that by recognizing the nonverbal communication, the minimal cues that are happening as they respond to a story, like a metaphor, for example. And in terms of indirect suggestion, the same thing. You're suggesting things indirectly, which means you're implying something rather than saying it directly. If they then respond, for example, if you want to get an arm levitation and you're encouraging that to happen indirectly, maybe you're talking about like an uplifting feeling and I've got to hand it to you and there's no harm in your discovering something for yourself and then not realizing you haven't actually discovered it for yourself, but it's happened all by itself. This kind of indirect language, when you start to see the phenomena occurring, that's how you know that particular form of suggestions has worked in evoking that phenomena or that behavior or whatever. And separately with metaphors, when you see somehow some like aha or some enlightenment or somehow like an agreement with a head nod, that's also, agreement during the actual session. And you mentioned tasking there, Matthias. Now, of course, tasking is something you give post-hypnotically. It's something they go and do after hypnosis. And the thing with tasking is you don't know for certain until it's worked, until they come back. When they come back, you'll know whether it's happened or not. How you choose what tasks to give just comes through, again, practice and experience. I've talked about creating tasks before. I don't want to spend a lot of time on talking about how to create them, etc. But it's similar to the way you create metaphors, in fact. You start with the outcome, then you will kind of work backwards. Like with jokes, it's a similar kind of format. So you create tasks that you believe will be accepted and realistically can be carried out by the client and will lead to some kind of insight or a change in behavior. And of course, the way you know whether that's worked or not is when they come back, you ask them how they've been, what's been happening in their life. Did you do that? Did you do that task, or what happened when you did it? What did you think? What was the result of that? And so you start to get feedback then, but you can't do it at the time. So really at the very beginning, Matthias, when you're learning to use indirect suggestion or metaphors or tasking, you don't really know what you're going to get back from your interventions until you're able to observe the non-verbal communication confirming or disagreeing with what's happening. So one way to avoid failure with this is to actually be very, very artfully vague. Give tasks that you just make them up and you don't consciously know why you've given them. That way your unconscious mind is being made to create a task for the client, and then you see the result of that, for example. Or when it comes to metaphors, make up a story without knowing what you're going to say. Just open your mouth and give the story and see what happens like that. This way, you're kind of trusting your unconscious mind to do all the hard work for you. Your unconscious mind will already have some ideas, but of course, if you're right at the beginning of this in your career, it hasn't yet learned how to do this well. But it's just through trial and error initially, which is why you need to practice. Whenever you're learning hypnotherapy or anything you're learning, you have to do it. Of course, you have to practice it and work with other people to hone your skills.